everyone. Thanks for coming today. I hope you've had a really good day one. I've been waiting all day to talk about analyzing text data. But first, I want to introduce myself. My name's Alicia, and I work on the GCP and G Suite developer relations teams. And I'm looking mostly at what data analysts do and what solutions they need. So I hang out a lot in spreadsheets, but I'm starting to learn more SQL and JavaScript to kind of open up new possibilities for what I'm building. There's a few products down here that I've been focusing on in the G, like the G world, Google. It's kind of a quiz for me, actually, because these things are hard to remember. But I work a lot with Sheets, AppScript, Data Studio, BigQuery, the machine learning APIs in GCP, and also Dataprep, and really anything and everything, even outside of Google. So I'm talking about a few of these today. So I work at Google. It's a company that's very data-driven. So whether I have interacted with a service or a team at work, or I've gone on an offsite with my teammates or taken a training, pretty much 95% of the time I'm going to get some sort of feedback survey asking for my experience in that. And it's not actually limited to my work life. I'm getting surveys all over the place. So when I travel, I'm getting surveys. When I'm shopping, I'm getting surveys. That doesn't happen too much. When I'm when I'm interacting with customer service and they're asking me how my interactions were, this is just a few. I went through my email, and it was insane how many surveys I've gotten recently. So why am I getting so many, and why are all of you? Well, collecting and implementing user feedback is really one of the best ways to improve your product. So we all look at analytics, and that may be able to show you what is happening, but feedback really helps us understand the why. So if you go into your analytics and you see that people are using one feature twice as often as another, or people are dropping off in the sign-up flow, or if people stop using your product or are using it less frequently, by looking at the customer feedback alongside those analytics data, you can get a much clearer picture of what's going on, and you can also start to see both problems that need fixing, but opportunities that may be able to provide more value for you and the people using your products. So you'll see actually in all of these examples that I showed you earlier, I kind of highlighted in yellow, they each have the opportunity to provide open-ended feedback. And so why are they providing that opportunity? Well, if you build a survey that's full of just rating scales and multiple choice questions, you're kind of restricting the answers to your own assumptions. So by opening it up, you're actually going to really know what your customers are thinking and get things back that completely surprise you. So what I want to talk about is how we can collect, analyze, and visualize actually this open-ended feedback. So there's probably a lot of different ways. I'm going to show you one possible way that I put together. And I do work at Google, and this is next. So definitely going to come into play, some of these Google products. But I want to kind of tell it through kind of a scenario. And the scenario is planning a trip. So probably a lot of you have planned a trip. You go out to kind of these websites, and you read feedback on either hotels or vacation rentals. And the reviewers provide really diverse feedback. It can be about the location, about things they did in the area, cleanliness in the actual hotel room or in the vacation rental, interactions with the staff or the facilities. So I'm just going to, I thought that was a really good example of kind of open-ended feedback with diverse content. So I'm going to walk you through an example using an Airbnb property, actually not in the Pyrenees, in Boston, in the United States. There's actually two properties I analyzed. I found the data set on Kaggle, which is a data science platform you might have heard about. They have a ton of open data sets, and it's a great way to kind of practice playing with these tools. So you'll see the data as we go along, what it looks like. So let's start by talking about how to collect that feedback. I'm actually not going to touch on survey design today. I hope you didn't come for a social sciences talk, because I'd actually love to learn more about that too. There's a lot of complexities there. There's things like proper branching and length of survey and who you collect from and the primacy and recency effect. But I will talk about the tools you can use and the tools I'm going to use in this demo. So our architecture diagram for this demo starts here with Google Forms. Don't worry, there's going to be some more things filling the space, but not too much, just the right amount. Google Forms really allows you to create surveys right in your browser. Probably most of you have used it. It's very collaborative. People without a Google account can even edit and view and respond to surveys. There's actually some analysis tools built into Google Forms, so you can get some immediate analysis done for you. There's also templates. So I was looking through the template. There's even a template for customer feedback. So if you're a startup and you're just trying to get started with collecting customer feedback, there's a template for you. People responding to the form can actually upload files, so they could upload images or documents that you ask them for. And there's other features like shuffling the multiple choice responses, which help handle the primacy and recency effect that I mentioned earlier. You can create pre-filled URLs, so like I could send this form out to somebody that stayed in a specific property with that property pre-filled in the property ID. And it's free, so that doesn't hurt. But on the right is a simple form that I created today just to collect the feedback. Now, I am going to be running Airbnb feedback through this form, so, it's a good example. So now where does all that open-ended feedback go? We've got the external Google form, and when you set up a Google form, you can choose two places for it to store the data. So it can either responses can be stored inside the Google form or backed by a Google Sheet. So I'm choosing to back mine with a Google Sheet for a few reasons. First, because the sheet can be a playground for doing a lot of analysis, ad hoc, but also the sheet will connect to my data visualization tool really well, so I wanted to have it ready to go. So what does the data look like? You're seeing kind of the spreadsheet form of the Airbnb data here. So I have the timestamp of when the form was submitted, and also the reviewer's name, the property ID, the first night they stayed there, and their open-ended comments. So now that we have the form collecting the data and the structure in place for soliciting and collecting that feedback, I can kind of get to the true headliner for this talk, which is the analyzing. So here we are back at this sheet full of responses, and there's a lot of text in there. So I don't want you to panic. I don't want you to read all of it. But this is kind of what we're here to solve this afternoon. You may even have some spreadsheets in your Google Drive right now that are in this state. So there's a couple ways we can start to tackle that. The first one, which you've probably done before, and it's not a bad way, but is manually reviewing all of those responses. Well, this is pretty energy intense. It actually takes a lot of energy to read. And even at smaller volumes, this data set that I showed you on the previous slide, that showed about 15 reviews out of the 716, and that was text clipped. So those reviews can get quite lengthy. The text data is also highly unstructured, so there's grammar and syntax rules to think about. It can come in a number of different languages, so my data set actually had 10 different languages represented. It is not really scalable. Imagine we're going to manually review this data, and we're going to start by looking at maybe some specifics about the property location and the property cleanliness. We can start reviewing those and noting when people mention that, but what if we want to add more entities to review? So we also want to review how the wireless internet worked, or additional properties. Well, it starts to be very labor intensive and not very scalable. We could then try to start reviewing multiple properties. Maybe as I want to review 10 properties. So it just doesn't scale, especially when you are doing this manually. And finally, this is my panic mode. But finally, before I do that, I want to just talk a little bit about if you were to find enough humans to do all of this review, you would find that the analysis was still pretty inconsistent because we humans are very different and we interpret language very differently. So, next. I want to think about turning on the brakes. So we've just kind of had a panic moment about reviewing all of this text manually. So what if we just change the way we collect the data? So instead of giving them that beautiful box for free-form text, we just imagine all of the ways that they might want to review or what we care about. Well, like I said before, this will inevitably miss some really great opportunities that you can take based on kind of those surprises I talked about. And in my case, I don't work at Airbnb and I can't change the way they collect their data. So if you don't have control over the data collection process, you can't change the data collection design. So what we're going to try today is leveraging machine learning. And the best part about this is it doesn't require any machine learning expertise. So to make that possible, we have something called Cloud Natural Language. So Cloud Natural Language is an API for analyzing text using a pre-trained machine learning model. It has several features. So first, it can extract entities from text, like proper nouns or objects. It can also detect sentiment, so whether it's a positive block of text or negative. It can return linguistic details by analyzing the syntax of the text. And it can also classify text into categories. So you can pass it a block of text. It will categorize it into one of 700 categories and let you know. This might be good for something like classifying newspaper articles. It can do that very well. I'm going to specifically use a method that both extracts the entities and detects sentiment. So to get a sense of how Cloud Natural Language can analyze your data, I want to move to my laptop real quick and show you. Can we change to the demo? Oh, it's up. It's just not here. All right. So this is our product page for Cloud Natural Language. And what I'm going to do here, there's a try the API box, which is really great. You don't have to set up any code. You can just I'm going to take one of the examples of the reviews from a property and show you the visualization of what the API would respond with. So you can see here, it returns a list of entities from the text. And for each entity, for example, Sean, there's a sentiment score and a sentiment magnitude. The score ranges from -1 at very negative to +1 for a very positive sentiment. And magnitude ranges from 0 to infinity. And it's really just the strength of the sentiment regardless of being positive or negative. So back to the slides. So we have Cloud Natural Language, but how do I connect Cloud Natural Language with Sheets? So the answer here is AppScript. Show of hands, how many of you know about AppScript or have used AppScript? Awesome. So you're going to be ready to go with this. So AppScript is a scripting language. It's based on JavaScript, and it has enhancements that give you the ability to automate things across Google products. What's great is I'm going to use this to connect to Cloud Natural Language, but I'm going to use it also for a lot of the pre-processing in my spreadsheet that I'm going to do with the data. The code editor is right in your browser. It runs on Google servers, so there's nothing to provision. And here's just a quick example of a short snippet of code to show you the power. So this function, sendMap, takes an address that's in a cell in a Google spreadsheet. It renders a static map, and it sends it to an email address specified. So this is using kind of the enhancements for Maps, Sheets, and Gmail to send in 5 lines of code a map to some email address. And there's several services beyond Maps and Gmail, like Slides, Docs, and more, so you can do things really quickly. So just to recap, we have a form collecting the data. It's backed by a Google Sheet. And we have Cloud Natural Language ready to help analyze the data and AppScript to help manage that communication. So I want to switch back over to my demo and show you kind of what that looks like in action. So here is so I showed you a screenshot of the form, but I wanted to show you what it looks like on the web. It's a fairly utilitarian form because I'm not actually publishing it for this purpose, but it includes a drop-down for the property ID, first night of stay, and then a short and long answer box for the reviewer's name and comments. On the form backend, you can see kind of what I mentioned earlier. I think I can show you where you can shuffle the order option. This helps manage kind of any of these primacy or recency effect. And over in the responses tab, you can see the analysis products I mentioned. So it automatically shows you some charts and graphs based on the data that you're getting back. So in this case, we got more responses back for this blue property 66288. So that's Sean's property for future reference. Now, let's look at the sheet that's collecting the responses. So here in the form responses tab, this is where all of the data will automatically go when people answer the form. Now this tab, really you can add anything you want to it, but it's designed to house the data for the form. So if you add a new question to the form, which you can, it will create a new column to house that data. I want to do some pre-processing. I don't really want to get in the way of the ability to change the form. So what I did is I created another tab called Review Data. Now, Review Data, you see it has like the same first 5 columns, so this includes all of the data from the form, but I also have 3 new columns, so language detected, comments, English, and entity sentiment. So in the language detected column, I have a formula which returns the language code for the comment text. So it uses this function called detect language. Let's see if, not sure how big that is. Secondly, in the English comments, I'm using Google Translate to translate any non-English comments into English. So funny story, when I first built this spreadsheet and I was doing this, I actually we have a cloud translation API that can detect the language and make the translation. And it's only when I started, kind of like searching around, trying to figure out how to use this API and how to do this, that I realized that Google Sheets has built-in functions. So that was actually a great win. The entity sentiment column is actually being used as a flag later on for when I process it against Cloud Natural Language. So I did process a lot of the data already, so it shows as complete, but I'm not really doing any data processing there. So to show, I could copy all of the, I could decide every week, say, to go in, look for new responses, copy them over to this tab, and then, paste down the formulas. But I can do this pretty easily with AppScript. So I'm going to access AppScript Editor through the Tools menu. And it'll bring up a new, let's make that a little bit bigger. And I want to show you the pre-processing script that I wrote. So this script does 3 things. What it does first is it copies the form responses into the review data sheet for me, so those first 5 columns. It pastes in the formula for detecting the language, and it also pastes in the formula for translating comments to English. And you'll notice a couple things. I'm using R1C1 notation because it makes it really simple to create formulas with relative cell references. And I also wanted to point out that this function is going to be triggered every time the form is completed. So when the form's completed, there's actually an event object that's part of that event happening, which I'm denoting here as E. But it actually comes with an entire response that includes the values from that form. So in fact, the script isn't copying from the form responses tab to the review data tab. It's actually taking data from the actual event of someone filling out the form and copying that data into our tab. So now that I've set up the script, how am I going to run it for each new form submission? Well, that's pretty easy. I have a triggers menu here that I've set up a trigger for my onFormSubmit function to run from the spreadsheet every time the form is submitted. I have some notifications here in case I can have it email me if it fails, which is great, especially when I'm testing, but it hasn't been failing, so we'll see, demo gods. So now now we're ready for that. So now that you've seen kind of what I've put together, I want to show you in action what this pre-processing looks like. So I've submitted most of the reviews to this form. I want to get to the bottom of the data here. Whoops. OK, so I've submitted most. So you see I have 706 reviews. But I saved 10 in my back pocket to run. Now I'm going to have to, there we go. In my back pocket so I could run it and show you in real time these form responses coming in. So I actually wrote a script that will submit responses to the form. And so I will set that to go. There'll be 10 come through, a few seconds in between. So I'm just going to show you kind of what's happening. So we'll start to see them come in here in the form responses sheet as they're completed, hopefully. Oh, they're coming in down there. But then you'll also see that they're copying into my review data tab, and the formulas are being copied in as well. So this way, anytime somebody fills out the form, I don't have to do anything manually. It's going to automatically do my data pre-processing. All right. So we do see over here, though, that the entity sentiment column is not completed. And this is because I have a separate function that's going to call the natural language API. So I'm going to go back into my code editor to show you what that looks like. So I first want to show you where I make the call to the API. So this function, I'm calling it retrieve entity sentiment, takes in a line of text. So this is going to be, ultimately my comments. And it's going to package it up with all of these options required by the natural language API. It's then going to use URL fetch app, which will make the HTTP request to the API endpoint. So this is the endpoint for my analyzing entities with their sentiment, and then I have an API key. So once I call the API, it'll return a response, and that will be what I return at the end of this function. So the second function I have is kind of the workhorse. Don't be afraid by all of the lines of text, because this is mostly kind of giving it, the lay of the land. Where am I working? But where it really starts to get interesting down here is where I'm processing each row. So after the housekeeping items, I'm going to find any rows. So I'm going to process through each row, look for any of them that have a comment in English, but do not have the complete value in their entity sentiment cell. And then I'm going to take the comment in English, and I'm going to run the retrieve entity sentiment function, which is what I just showed you, which we'll call the natural language API. Then, with the response that we get back from the API, I'm going to take each of the entities that it identifies in the text and their sentiment magnitude, sentiment score, and I'm going to paste them into new rows on a new sheet. And then finally, I'm going to paste complete into that column so that if I ever run the function again, it will skip over it and it won't double count it. And then there's one final really tiny but mighty function in this script, which is onOpen, and this is what creates the menu that I've been using to run the script from my sheet. So you can see that I can create a new menu called Demo Tools with any menu item I want, and it can be associated with a different function in app script. So this is really great because maybe you're working with a diverse team, and people shouldn't have to always go into the editor. You can click, you can pick to run mark entity sentiment from inside of here, but it's much easier to go into a spreadsheet, see that you want to run the function, and then run it directly in the spreadsheet. So I'm going to choose to run it from the spreadsheet since I went to the work of making the menu. But I want to get, again, here. So we're set up here. We're set up here. So I have run a bit of the data already. But I'm going to go ahead and run this function. And you'll see that the entity sentiment column starts to get marked as complete as the API goes through each row. And I start down here. Let's see if we can catch up. So for each review, there's going to be multiple entities here. So, Donald, we have quite a few entities coming in from his review with their sentiment score and magnitude. There's also salience, which is like the importance of that entity within the block of text. And there's also a number of mentions because people might mention the same entity multiple times within the review. So that's running. You'll also notice I'm having the script copy in a couple extra items. So the timestamp, the reviewer name, the stay date, the property ID. These are things that came through on the form. And I essentially wanted a way to join back the entities with the comment that they came from so that I could always find the full text review for the entities. Because I don't have kind of a unique identifier. Timestamp could be non-unique for sure. So I wanted to talk a little bit, though I did just manually trigger this by running mark entities and sentiment. But just like the other script, I don't want to have to constantly think about coming in and running this. I actually wrote it in such a way that I could set up a trigger, similar trigger to run this. And what I would choose for this trigger would be to run mark entity sentiment maybe every half hour. So I could do a minutes timer every 30 minutes. It would probably depend on how often my data was coming in, how quickly. But this is a way I could just kind of like keep the spreadsheet up to date over time without having to go in and manually run it. The way I'm choosing my triggers, so the reason why I separated them out and I'm kind of the different pre-processing and sending to the natural language API, is that the pre-processing script is actually quite simple and it runs really quickly. And to me, it made really sense, since it was quick start to finish, to just run every time the form is completed. It's not calling any other API. So on the retrieve entity sentiment, that API call can take a little bit of time only because it pulls back the data and then it's writing new lines to that entity sentiment data spreadsheet for every new entity. So depending on the length of the comment, it could take 30 seconds to write those lines back, and I don't want to worry about limitations around concurrent executions. So by writing it in a way that loops through each row, calls the API, returns and writes all of the response data into the spreadsheet, I can be sure that I'm not going to come up against any sort of quota or limit on simultaneous executions. So I think we can go back to the slides for now. So now we have, well, I didn't show you, but we have almost 10,000 rows of entities. So from those 715 reviews, we have 10,000 different entities that were identified and talked about with their sentiment and magnitude. So this is a really great way to visualize the data. The tool I'm going to use for visualizing the data is Data Studio, and that's like the completion of this wonderful slide. I would imagine that some of you are familiar with Data Studio, but for those of you who aren't, the basics are that it's Google's BI and dashboarding platform. It's free, and it's available today in beta. So why did I choose Data Studio? Well, first, its ability to connect to my data source, which was Sheets, is particularly one reason why I chose it. It also connects to other Google data sources like BigQuery, Cloud SQL, Cloud Storage. It also can connect to Google services like Analytics and YouTube. If you have on-premise data in MySQL, you can connect to that. If you have other data sources that are accessible through public APIs or enterprise data over a private API, you can build something called a community connector to connect to that data source. And those are written in app scripts, so it's actually great, especially for someone like me. It can be an extension of your newfound or existing app script skills without having to learn something new. Also, there's hundreds of data connectors already built, and once you build one, you can put it in a marketplace. So maybe you don't want to build your own community connector, but somebody else already has. So for a lot of popular data sources, there are community connectors out there. Secondly, the ease with which I can just create a pretty good visualization quickly. There's templates. These are a few examples of templates from the gallery that Data Studio has. But it's just really easy to get your first chart up and running. And finally, Data Studio. This is actually not a finally. This is probably like my biggest reason, but it's just built for sharing. So you can share a Data Studio report with a link just like Google Drive. You can share it publicly, privately. You can use Data Studio like a presentation, which is kind of how I'll use it later in this talk. And you can also embed it into a web page, which is really great. Anybody can view it. Users can interact with it. It's an interactive infographic. They can drill down, and they don't need a Google account. So I'm going to switch over now to my demo again. And I want to show you, actually, over here. So I want to show you how to get started. We have our spreadsheet. And I want to connect and kind of see my first visualization of the data. So I'm starting a new report, and I'm going to create a new data source where I connect. Whoops, I'm not going to learn more, as interesting as that is. Connect to our spreadsheet. So I'm going to start and look at the entity sentiment data, and we'll see how well this connects. But it is doing a lot for you. It's pulling the schema, it's pulling the data types. You can actually preview these and decide if I want to change the type of data. You can also add a field, which I'm going to do because I forgot to do one little thing in my app script, which was to do just a little bit of normalization on that text data, which by lowercasing all of the entity. Because if it comes in, if Wi-Fi is capitalized and then not capitalized, I still want to see those together. So I'm going to save that. I've just created a new field. Go back here. And so here's my new field, and that looks good to me, so I'm going to add it to the report. All right, so here we have a bunch of charts we can pick from. I'm going to start with a scatter chart, and I want to see for each of the entities kind of we'll do number of mentions on the x-axis, so what's mentioned the most, and then for the sentiment score, so average sentiment score for those entities. And we can start to see kind of these entities coming in. I'm going to visualize the labels, but make it so we can see a few. And then I'm going to change the y-axis to go from -1 to 1, since that's what the sentiment score can be between. So you start to see that really quickly I was able to connect to my sheet and start and add a field even, which would have been a whole new column in Sheets, and then be able to visualize the data. So let's pop over. It would have taken me a little bit longer to come up with what I'm about to show you, and show you what I did preparing for this talk. So I just wanted to kind of give a high-level summary of the data that was coming in from my response form. So here I can see submissions on a monthly basis. I can see the language that they were submitted in. I can filter on specific property IDs or on time slices. On my second page, I'm starting to look at the entities and their average sentiment score. So here's actually the scatter plot that I created earlier. So you can start to see in the top right-hand corners things that are mentioned a lot and are liked a lot. Things below 0 are looked upon less favorably. And on the right-hand side of this, you can see kind of entities that are mentioned with the highest average sentiment score, like value and location, and entities mentioned with the lowest average sentiment score. And these are interactive, so I can scroll through and see additional entities, or again, filter. I think this page really shows the viewer what made an impression upon the folks staying in these two properties. And then thirdly, if I want to drill down into the specific entity, so I've decided in this case to pick Sean's property and look at mentions of the word bed. So in this case, I have a histogram. I can see, when people mention a bed, is it mentioned mostly neutrally, but also there's some people mentioning it very positively and some mentioning it very negatively. And also we could see over time the change in the average sentiment score for that entity. This might be especially interesting if improvements were made to the property to see how that impacted the sentiment overall. And finally, if you do want to drill down into that text data, it's really nice to be able to look at it. Now to get this data set, if you remember, I had the entities in one tab and the full review text in another. So what I used to put this together is by blending the data. So you can actually, I'll show you this in Data Studio. So you can blend data sources. So here, I was able to take my entity sentiment data and join it with my review data on these 3 join keys. And that way I could add the English comments and the original comments to one table that includes all of these items. And that was actually very, very easy to do. So, all right, whoops. I will discard changes. All right, so I've stuck with a fairly, I'm going to go back to the view here so you don't have to see that. I stuck with a fairly generalized report here on the data received from the feedback form. I wanted to show everything we got back, but there's different audiences you'd probably tailor this to. You know, if I'm targeting the rental hosts, I could probably focus on, you know, what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. You know, maybe the Wi-Fi is really great, but people are complaining about plumbing. If I'm targeting maybe just the product team, you could get a lot of great insight about, you know, what renters really care about, how to coach hosts on, you know, what might be kind of a diamond that people actually really care about hair dryers. I actually didn't find that in this data set, but, you know, there could be things that are surprising. And then you might decide, I want to start collecting, you know, targeted quantitative feedback on that from renters after they stay in the property. So, you know, folks already do this with asking specific scores for, you know, 1 to 5 stars on location or cleanliness and that sort of thing, because that's what they find is very important to people. But there's not to say potentially other categories you would want to dive into. So now my report's ready to share. Again, I can share it with select people. I can share it with everyone. Viewers can drill down into the data just like I did. And it's great because they're able to do that without having access to the underlying data source. So, you know, here, for example, I stripped out the name of the reviewer. So it does kind of provide a layer of separation between what the viewer can see and the original data source. So let's go back to my slides. All right, so when I think about what this demo kind of solved today, it was really making the analysis more consistent and scalable. We added a numeric structure to all of that text data, so that made the analysis and visualizations possible. And we also maintained the ability to collect the free-form text feedback. We didn't have to change how we collected the data. So I wanted to give you guys some resources for getting started. If you haven't learned AppScript or you're still learning AppScript, I definitely recommend going to our overview page. I actually also, when I started learning AppScript, I took a Codecademy JavaScript class online, which helped me immensely. I don't have a programming background, so it helped me a lot understand kind of the notation of JavaScript. Also, try the API in the product page. It's so much easier than having to write the call yourself, especially if you're getting started, and it gives you a sense of if the machine learning model really helps you understand your specific data. There's actually other machine learning APIs, like the Cloud Vision API, which takes an image and extracts metadata from that image. So you could do a cool, you know, something with your images if you have a big list of image URLs in a spreadsheet trying to decode what's in there. So again, you can use the try it page and see what it can do. I have a blog post that is a similar demo to this that does go through and include code on how to run this yourself. But if you want to do the exact demo I did today with, you know, front to end with the forms through to Data Studio, I do have the demo code that I'm running on my GitHub. So that includes instructions on how to recreate this yourself. And there's also a code lab. I don't know if any of you have been to the Code Labs garden, but those tutorials are great because they give you everything that you need and they take you through step by step. And there's a code lab that's very similar to this that shows you how to connect a Google Doc to Cloud Natural Language to analyze sentiment within a Google document. So I also recommend doing that code lab. And there's some great sessions. So today is over, and some of my favorite sessions were today. So I wanted to bring these up in case you guys wanted to watch them later on YouTube. But they talk about things like our ML products. Things like machine learning APIs and AutoML are very accessible to people without a development background. So, and then I just wanted to say thank you. So thanks for coming. Please follow me on Twitter and Medium. I do have links to I have some Medium posts that talked a little bit about deep dives into particular challenges I had when creating this demo and how I got through them. So those might be somewhat interesting to you. And I'd also like to hear back from you if you create some cool solution using G Suite and our ML APIs or, you know, a new AppScript project. I'd love to hear about it. So definitely send those tweets to me. All right. Thank you, everybody.